Say your name. Opening opposition. Hey, opening opposition. Hello. HF. Yeah. Cool. You can get started. Thanks.
Right, so just a few early clarifications from my speech. Reporting things that are actual criminal offenses. That is to say that we need to dox in those instances. But if they choose to, we're also fine with defending that instance. We think this debate in a large part takes place in instances where you have silence when it comes to legal recourse. That's to say, in instances where you have things such as body shaming or other sort of sexual harassment, spammings, and all those sort of things that take place, right? That means that there is no alternative in many cases for these women to take, but they are literally forced into their rooms and forced into the emotional trauma that they have to go on a day-to-day basis, right? We're okay with these women also doing this anonymously if they don't feel that they're able to come out. The internet allows for you to do that. We're also okay in instances where they're able to do it publicly, so they could tell you why we're able to build a norm around this and how that encourages more people to do so publicly, even though their information is also being let out. Two arguments I'm going to bring you in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how this helps women get comfort and why we think that's something that's extremely important in this debate. Secondly, I'm going to explain why we think this proves an important deterrence and allows for some level of deterrence and punishment for individuals who partake in this. Right? Moving on to my first argument, how we think this helps women get some level of comfort. Two reasons why this is the case and why it's important. Firstly, we think this is a chance for them to vent out all the outrage in which they have baggage, right? At the point in which you've gone through an emotional stress, at the point in which you've already felt like you've been jilted and wrongfully traumatized emotionally, we think many people go into huge levels of emotional stress. The ability for you to vent that out is something that is lacking in status quo. Your online perpetrator isn't someone you can find, isn't exactly someone you can lash out to and feel that like you've been able to get some form of recourse from doing so. We think being able to express yourself by going online and like releasing that information is a way for you to be able to vent out those things, right? Even if we don't cure all the emotional stress that you face, we think that that's a marginal benefit that is extremely important in those cases. That to some extent you're able to vent out and say that I've been able to deal with this case to a certain extent, right? It's bad enough that you suffer, but suffering without being able to have anything to do, we think is even worse off. That form of venting, we think, is extremely important to prove some level of comfort to these people that they feel like they've actually done something to their perpetrators. Secondly, we think you're likely to build a support community by doing this, right? And the reason why this is important is that it also encourages other women to do two things. Firstly, it encourages them to come out and express this information, that you don't have to be locked in silence at the point in which you've been treated harmfully, that you can actually come out, and this is an important way of you getting some level of comfort. We think that that's something that's extremely important. What it does and what it sends out to other women is that it's okay for you to seek solace, right? That if I have released that information, you know that I've gone through that experience, and you're able to then communicate with me, and we're able to form a need a community. You need to be able to talk to people, and you need to be able to express yourself in the way that you want to. Before I move on to my second case, second argument, do you support abuse in response to abuse? First of all, you need to tell me why this exactly is abuse, right? Releasing information of these people, right? We don't think that's the case, right? But sure, if it's abuse, we support it wholeheartedly, right? At the point in which you have no other form of recourse and you are going through that emotional stress, we think if you release these people, it's worth the trade-off at all. I don't know what principle case on why you shouldn't abuse these people exist at all, right? But secondly, we think it proves some level of deterrence to many of these people, right? What's important to note is that online abusers online. That's the reason why, which is something that we note in this debate, right? That in many cases also does it at the get-go, right? We think it's extremely important, for you to be able to at the point in which their privacy is something that is already stopped in the reason why you don't come to people and actually have so many of those jilting and all those things is because of the fact that you're unable because of the fact that you're unable to protect your privacy. So in many cases, they love to be able to keep their privacy. Why do we think this is extremely important? Firstly, we think that the fear of being exposed in many cases is more likely to send. If you go ahead and express this message, you will be known at the point in which women are able to tell other people that this is your information and this is the information of the person that did this action, right? That stops the ability for that same person to also do the same thing to another person at the point in which you, like to the extent you buy the community argument, that also means that other people are informed about this person to a large extent, right? But even if they are not involved, they're not informed, the fact that they already know that this person has actually taken on this action, I think is extremely important in itself, right? Because that, like the perpetrator, is more likely to know that their information will be leaked out if they carry out this action, and that's the deterrence that they have in itself. The very fact that it takes place on social media and it takes place online means that you're more likely to have circles knowing about this information at the point in which one means, right? If one person is sharing this and you're able to get traction around it, you're literally having the information of this person being spread across and everyone is able to know, right? Just in response to that POI again, right? So I mean, it's okay for you to just tag this as abuse, right? But I think to be able to punish these people is something that we think is important, right? Presumably, they are going to support some form of legal recourse, or at least legal recourse in instances where it's outright abuse, right? That's a form of punishment that takes place. The problem in status quo is there is no legal recourse that someone can take in instances where you feel that you've been abused, right? We think this proves a corrective measure in that instance, right? But secondly, the fear of like immediate repercussions that many of these people face is something that makes them not want to come out and continue doing this, right? At the point in which you're able to lose friends, when your friends know that this is someone who has actually carried out these actions, that's a deterrent factor that allows for many people to not do this, right? It also thinks it proves a form of like punishment at the point in which you feel like your information has come out and you're losing a lot of like your image is something that is negatively tainted. That's a form of punishment that we think is valuable for these people. Like, we would love for these guys to just stop it and we wouldn't have to punish them in any way. If UP is going to come out and say that it's unfair that we punish them, they need to tell us why, in the absence of any legal recourse, many of these women should remain in emotional stress and damage. We're extremely proud to propose.
My video saw and I about the later opposition.
quite agree with position that we live in a society that was sexual harassment and issue. But the clashes from society that women receive on their end, it's just important for you to continually deal with the harm of like all the abuses you suffer from every day of your life, the spam messages you get from your stalkers, the harassment you get every day, because what they fail to consider that it's not just a one-time thing. It's a continuous thing for most women on the side of the house. Not seek any form of solace or solution within that hate. Then, we don't think that is the right approach, and we'll tell you how exactly this changes narrative of government, right? But the key point of the direct engagement is right? We think first that's problematic. People nuanced in a speech that they missed out are usually people that do it. They don't do it to one person, they do it to multiple other people as well in society. So if only what our benefit, like we achieve in terms of marginal benefit from every speech, is at least get these women out there to talk about it and build a community within each other in moving on, or even having a proper case to prosecute these individuals eventually, we'll take that on our side of the house, right? But secondly, right, we think it's important to have this message out there, right, before like you actually block them, right? Those we got right. So every learn to torment life, forms to keep doing this right. But second idea of how it leads into greater forms of abuse. I told you in the speech, do these things, or their privacy is something, right? So if you think as an individual, like you have been called out for certain act, and then the next right step for you to do is to go and physically abuse that, then we think we have a case against you within those regards, right? But lastly, right, on this whole account of like how it creates incentive to create fake accounts, right? We could consider that like we may not necessarily be able to track these individuals living under this fake account, but we'll tell you that at least if we're able to gather our marginal benefit of people gaining more confidence into coming out in a society that despises them, right, then we'll take that on our side of the house, right? So fine, like let them create more fake account. We'll tell you we'll still find them on our side of the house. Now, in my speech, right, on how this forms an idea of normalization, because quite concerning us openly that they live in a society that is not tolerant of this. Exactly why society is not tolerant, right? Now, right, there are being attention seekers, right? The individuals that are probably not suffering from this sound, but probably just want to have a form of platform or to do something to see general. More and more women gain confidence in doing or releasing this information. Doxxing, right? We think, right, it becomes something society is aware of. Now it's not just that one woman on our side of the house that is seeking attention. It's a lot of women doing it on our side of the house. So exactly what does this achieve in terms of benefit on side opening government, right? So we tell you this creates a form of traction. Then the problem becomes a limelight, it becomes a thing to talk about in society. Because let's even look about like issues when it comes to sexual harassment, right? We think the more often than not, problems women are often faced is like it's always them, that one individual against the word of that other individual of the perpetrator, right? So we tell you it changes on our side of the house. It's not just that one individual, it's multiple individuals who can relate to the story and are confident enough to come out to talk about it. That's why we think like even most success cases when we have in terms of what sexual harassment and issues are when multiple women are to build a case against these perpetrators, and we tell you this is how we try. And then secondly, right, then it allows community to care, right? So even if you as an individual, right, like living privately on your side of the house, right, you are on the side of the house, right, but if you see someone coming out and explaining these things and you are able to relate to it, and you saw her being antagonized by their society, right? You're defend that right because this is on the same side of the story, right? So we tell you these are the kind of changes of the house, right? But then secondly, right, we tell you that in a society that has not been welcoming towards building a tangible case because of lack of evidence when it comes to private issues, right? If you have multiple individuals that are affected by these cases, then you have a legit case to build against this perpetrator on our side of the house. These are multiple marginal benefits which only our policies could achieve on the side of the house. We don't know what the alternative from closing opposition might be.
Yes. Community and removal of privacy that you want to achieve can be done by merely stating the name of the abuser. But doxing does a lot more than that, it releases a lot more information. What is the particular benefit then of doxing?
When it comes to names and identity, right, we think names is not enough, right? Identity, right, releasing a lot of more information like actively define that individual as an existing. Even just releasing the name of Eric Tono as the perpetrator, there are thousands of Eric Tonoas like that exist in status quo, right? But me releasing further details, particularly identify that individual as the perpetrator. But this individual like deserve it on the side of the house, right? We tell you like even if it's probably not criminally done, like punishable in terms of like building or gathering evidences, right? We think these are people that have sinned against like creating like harms or like imposing harms against other of the society. So the question then be, should you as the victim remain silent and continue to suffer? So we think yes, they probably deserve it even from side of the house if that's what. This and gentlemen, right? This is benefit. It's the only way that answers for this in terms of gaining traction in society and actually have a say when it comes to
the urban cop, we have the deputy leader of
When women who want to participate in the internet, online, and then entire use make friends in, do things on, are shut off it by people who condemn them and call them names at every turn. That's something that we can't accept on our side of the house. The cost of online abuse is massive. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about how doxing these perpetrators cuts to one of the main causes why they do this online abuse in the first place, and therefore why it's effective. I'm going to talk about why this is principally justified, and I'm going to talk about why we return control to women in a way that is important. But first, some setup for it. Okay, these guys say from opening opposition that other alternatives exist and therefore we should do nothing. Firstly, that's kind of a highly questionable claim. If you look at the other alternatives that they talk about, things like you can report it to Twitter, it falls prey to the very problem they describe, that online accounts are anonymous and spring up like hits on a hydra, which is to say that if you report one account to Twitter, and even if Twitter bans that account, which they don't, given that they literally is a reason, is a breach of their terms of service, they are even willing to reinstate Richard Spencer as long as he sticks to the fact that he is supposed to many Richard Spencers, even though his entire account is other people. These sites don't really care because all they do is chase the dollars. So firstly, I don't really see why these remedies come about. I don't really see how are good at policing the internet relevant to the debate, because this debate is not things are rival with those things. Because I don't really understand why it's about whether you choose doxing or whether you choose other forms of remedies. It's just about whether doxing on its own does more harm. Secondly, they then say, well, we can just ignore it, as if it was that easy to do. I think these guys ignore the scale of online abuse to women. How firstly, it is not just more than what men face online, in that if you are a man and a woman both doing the same thing on the internet, the woman will get called a litany of sexual slut-shaming sort of labels, the man likely is not, in that women often face situations like having their news posted online by jilted ex-boyfriends. Men tend not to face that for whatever reason, and so on and so forth. The sum total of this is that it's significant and crippling, and it keeps women off the internet because it's a place that's not welcoming to them. That's something that we regret on our side of the house. But the sum is that is also probably quite hard to ignore. And also, if you could ignore it, then you're probably not part of this debate. So if you are able to not react and not face up to the abuser, that's fantastic. But you don't really care if the only people who are secure enough to face up to the abusers or who are dealing with women being oversensitive. Sometimes harassment is just actually a compliment. When you call women sexy online, that's like, like, I don't really understand why women should accept being turned to sexual people, especially, and that makes them uncomfortable in these online spaces. So I don't think these are things that women can or should ignore, and you need to speak out. On this stuff about what it is, no privacy for these men, so they'll be deterred to deal with things that are important. It means that they cannot face reprisal for their actions, and they lack the ability to be socially shaped. So these men often don't want to admit both to themselves and other people that they are abusers. When you can be doxed, and the point here is that it's about the risk of having your identity exposed and other people knowing who you are, what a bad person you are, not actually about the actual likelihood of it. This creates a spectrum of social shame, especially for those new adherents to hate groups and so on and so forth. So probably Rush V, whose online persona is already synonymous with who he is in the real world, doesn't care about being doxed because he's already out there. But most people who are new adherents to groups like Red Pill don't want people to know that they are online abusers. So that's important, right? Because they don't want other people to know these double lives. So now they have that fear in the back of their mind when they have to act. But more importantly, it is all internet logic that these Red Pill subscribers believe to, which is that once you're doxed, you're dead online because you lose the freedom to speak freely, because everything you say is now attached to your real identity, and so on and so forth. doxing also gives real recourse to women in a variety of ways. Firstly, one female hacker can, if in fact escalate, and this is the whole inviting reprisal of opposition, kind of a good thing. Bring the scale of the internet where it is trackable into that law enforcement is generally quite good at deterring to some extent violence against women. Obviously, that's massively imperfect, as you see from statistics. The extent of real and the extent of online violence you face. Yes.
Online vote is so malicious. What makes you think that people will stand on the side of women?
Say again.
If you believe the online vote is so malicious, what makes you think that people will stand on the side of women? Stand on the side of women.
I don't think that people will stand on the side of women online. I just think that people can go out there and individually dox hackers. But secondly, and I'm going to go on to this, there have been instances of anonymous groups forming things like anti-revenge porn websites, or groups like Anonymous Doxing, people who they regard to be bad, so like pedophile rings and so on and so forth. So that does happen, but I would really like to see an extension. That's just a mechanism problem. Like, you can't find that information, so therefore we all not support doxing. Okay, very quickly onto why it's principally acceptable. I think in general we accept the framework of self-defense in this case. That one, if you can show you can be attacked, then two, it's principally legitimate for you to defend yourself. In that these women face a concerted effort to shame either themselves or to keep women in general offline, and I think it's acceptable for them to enact the defense, which is to say that they are defending themselves by enacting action that is harmful to the user. That's general that of self-defense. Finally, on agency, I think online bullying is that anonymous support networks and it empowers individual actions against the abuser. It's like so women's sense of ability to resolve it rather than resolve these reasons for
Yeah, is that okay with you guys?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So our opening talked to you a lot about how doxing is likely to be ineffective because societies at large tend to be conservative. Our unique contribution from closing opposition is that the self-selecting nature of social media and the internet at large encourages a pernicious acts of retaliation against women and also promotes this kind of misogynistic circle jerk that hinders proper legal protection for the victims of online abuse. 2 points in extension. First of all, about how the unique nature of the internet harms current and future victims of abuse, and secondly, in particular, how the most vulnerable women trapped in abusive and toxic relationships are harmed. But before that, some miscellaneous rebuttal. They said the draw of anonymity makes men ashamed when doxing happens. First of all, within a culture of doxing and retaliation against online abuse just makes these people far more cautious with how they express their perverse tendencies, right? It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Moreover, often the act of doxing encouraging a huge amount of affirmation from the echo chambers on Reddit or 4chan that these individuals belong to. So it's not clear that they will feel ashamed just because their personal views online. Then they said this encourages other women to come out and dox their abusers as well. This is only effective insofar as some support structure or some legal protection exists to protect these large numbers of women who will come out collectively. This debate already takes SOG protection. As I'll go on to show, also no support for these women come out to dox because of the toxic nature of the internet. First point of extension about how this is harmful for current and future victims of online abuse. The rest of the rebuttal will be integrated. Let's understand the context. We might not realize this because all of us are fairly liberal people who have progressive social media feeds, but the internet at large remains a very large retreat for highly misogynist people. The most public platforms for doxing, the platforms in which doxing is most likely to be effective, like 4chan and Reddit, remain dominated by highly conservative people. We see evidence for this in things like the bro culture or lab culture that remains prevalent on the internet. Critically, this part of the internet and the progressive part, which tends to affirm liberal views, tend to remain strictly bifurcated because of the self-selecting nature of social media, which affirms an individual's views by having algorithms that reflect his personal preferences, thus determining what is on his newsfeed. What are the consequences of this? Number one, women are far more likely to have their suffering belittled when they attempt to dox on highly public online platforms. When the act of doxing is incredibly severe in the eyes of bigoted men online. I think this is a uniquely confrontational move designed to publicly humiliate them, and this provokes a well, this guy perhaps didn't deserve to be publicly shamed, legitimate, and the woman was perhaps being too sensitive. This is especially important since flirting, for example, sex do not constitute harassment. This encourages a huge amount of outrage and response among the led culture dynamic, where the victims of online sexual abuse start having their abuse belittled in the eyes of the public, and moreover, the abusers might start getting affirmed and feel a source of affirmation for what they have done, because this toxic self-selecting nature of the internet. The offshoot of this, no thank you,
society turns a blind eyes to this is because in many cases they don't know the scale to which it happens and the scale of the harm in which it can cause.
But the way that
society,
society,
more people are able to come out and explain these things, that's when society is able to understand the extent of the harm.
First of all, we think that the way the society will receive this information will be framed in the eyes of these men-in-this who blow these specific cases out of proportion. Because the highly public platforms like 4chan and Reddit, where this information tends to be published, tend to be highly conservative and dominated by the voices of bigots. So we think that society may not even receive this information in full form. Moreover, we think that there will be more toxic retaliation attacks against women. It's not clear to me that this will just make society more aware that online abuse is happening. But second point of extension, that this harms the most vulnerable. We think that opening made it very clear that for this to be effective, we need collective action on the part of most victims. And we need a culture where doxing is imposed as a social expectation, or is in some way the norm for women. We think that many women may not be comfortable with doxing their online abusers. Opening up said, well, they might have body image issues. We don't think this is predominantly the case. We think that what often happens is that women and the victims of online abuse suffer from things like learned helplessness. They might feel like they have an obligation to their abuser because they're in a toxic relationship. For example, they might feel that they have some kind of debt to all these individuals. This is similar to how, in cases of spousal abuse, women often don't blame doxing puts them in a very uncomfortable situation. Expectation imposed upon them to do this highly confrontational measure that involves publicly shaming. This also makes them liable for measure because the families of victims, even law enforcement, can see, well, we help victims by creating robust law enforcement and by protecting the most vulnerable. We're very proud to stand in closing off.
So thank you, and to conclude the government bench, we have the government whip.
To respond to a large part of whatever closing opposition wants to say, let's just recontextualize what the world looks like in reality. Because what they told us was that society was somehow turned against women and wanted to further oppress these individuals, and that is the reason why doxing will work. Not recognizing that such institutions is it doesn't matter what exactly you do. Whether we look at the progression in society today, despite their attempts to continually blow up the small proportion of fake rape cases that exist, private protections have increased along like the general trend that we look at, because we think society in general was better protection from the abusers of these men to begin with, but more importantly, we get a lot of impact when it comes to creating support for fighting against abusers. So just look at, for instance, like the Stanford swimmer that was splashed across the headlines to say, look at the kind of lack of protection that women have in the rape culture that exists in impunity that men is able to have. We don't think men are able to distort exist in reality. But that because of anonymity that exists online, while society is sympathetic towards these individuals, they kind of impact is proportional on the online sphere precisely because although they are underground, they're able to use the anonymity to create more fear and havoc on these women. So let's understand why exactly these men even do this in the first place. The reality of the fact is that it's not just about revealing the name and address of these men. The truth of the matter is that this is about the deflation of the abuser. Because oftentimes online, when these individuals are seen to be anonymous, the kind of comments that they make can be seen to be overwhelming or omniscient. The fact that they can create multiple fake accounts like opposition wanted to paint it out to be, or the fact that, for instance, give the time and effort to post these things on your wall every single day without revealing their identity. You create a perception that these individuals could be anyone on the street, could be someone that you knew, could be someone who's actually powerful, or someone that you've interacted with at some point in your life. The fact that you're able to put a face and name to these individuals actually makes them more human. It removes that particular cloud of impunity that they seem to be able to have, and you reveal them for the kind of loser that exists in the basement of their mother, the way that they actually are. We think that this is specifically important, especially amounts of difference on the internet platform. Look, for instance, like for example, like a recent trend to be traditionally beautiful, and putting captions like, for instance, not that you please call back. He told me that we have a date for him, and all these. These are the kind of actions that remove women from the internet, allows them from meaningfully participating. Look at the instances of women who are not traditionally beautiful but continue. I yet say that I am proud of who I am. The problem with their side, the anonymous posts oftentimes create such an overwhelming impression of hatred against these women that you force them out of the internet before the kind of empowering message that they have could reach other women that could potentially substantially benefit from these kinds of understanding. That's why we think it's so particularly important. But also the next thing that they missed out was the reason why people say these things in the first place. We think that for the large part, individuals who go on to subreddits like the Red Pill, for instance, oftentimes say things for the sake of saying things, because you have impunity, because you have anonymity. You can exaggerate the opinions that you have and try to be as controversial as possible, because it gives you some illusion of affirmation for your loserish self on these particular subreddits where men go, yeah, that's the way, man. You know, women all suck. That's how you do it. That's how you're a bro. So oftentimes the kind of information and opinions that are created are skewed towards a particular fashion, so that these people are able to get some sort of online traction, some sort of online fame. There's some sort of impact to these people without actually revealing their face online. What is important for the not the perception of race, rather than actual race themselves. So they seem to think that we need to dox every single individual that exists out there in order for us to create any sort of meaningful impact. The fact of the matter is that oftentimes straight up the possibility of you getting doxed. That's why that's the deterrent effect that's important on their side. So we only need a few cases, also important, which is this. You don't have to dox everybody. You just have to dox the few individuals who are seen to be the leaders in these kinds of movements. The anonymous trolls, they're the most visceral and like the most prolific in terms of the kind of things that they post. The takedown of these couple of individuals who are seen to be the icons and leaders on subreddits like Red Pill, for instance, is particularly important when it comes to the dismantling of these specific kinds of echo chambers for these people, because you're removing the leaders, you're removing the people who are seen to be leading them, and revealing them for the kind of people that they are. Oftentimes as well, after being doxed, the kind of reprisal that these individuals get means that, I'll take you just a second, means that these individuals apologize, and therefore like these kinds of amenities like structures or statements oftentimes lose the legitimacy that they otherwise would have. Yes, after.
Did OG say that it was important for women to collectively come out and dox as many people and abusers as possible?
Yeah, sure. Like, I'm not against that, right? What I'm actually rebutting is the fact that you said that it's impossible to dox everyone, and that's a problem. What I'm saying is that you can collectively come out and dox as many people as you want, but you don't have to be able to dox all of them in order for the effect that we want to even exist in the first place. So I think a lot of the things that you were talking about doesn't actually exist. But also, I think they ignore the idea that oftentimes the big problem with like men's rights movements is the illusion of community that they get by engaging in these things like the subreddits or the echo chambers that these people exist in. What this does is that this disincentivizes new adherents, for instance, from submerging themselves in these sort of echo chambers that will otherwise change their worldviews and make them more extreme than they otherwise would be. We think there's a particular benefit on our side of the house. But lastly, I think it's the idea of agency and protection in general, because what this does is changes the norms, the way that women engage in the internet to begin with. Oftentimes, where women have to sit back and like not and like not come up for them as well. But at the end of the day, what we need to recognize is that on the online forum, in real life, all we are doing, ensuring that the accountability that you have for the things that you say is now equated to what you otherwise would have to live with. You say these things in person. We're very happy to propose.
Thank you. And to conclude the debate, we have the opposition whip.
The very misogynistic world that team government condemns is the one that they want to use as a means to support women who are trying to come out and move away from the suffering that they have been having over the past years. We're going to ask two questions this debate. First, what is the online world like? Second, how do you protect the most vulnerable? First, what is the online world like? Note that none of the other teams have cared actually to engage with our characterization of what the online world is like. And yet this underlies the debate. And the reason for this is simple. Their arguments about veterans and support communities are premised upon the fact that the online community necessarily force against their abusers. If we can prove that the online world is likely to act, the marginal benefit that they try to achieve will be outweighed by the immense cost that closing opposition. More and more conservative. Why is this so much increasingly liberal in order to online as compared to the offline society? So it's entirely right that closing government or government whip comes up and tells us that the offline society is increasingly more liberal and more moderate. But that's not the debate. The debate is about what the online world is like, the mechanism that you want to use to create support for these women. So we have argued that the online world is becoming far more conservative. And mind you, this is not just on Reddit and on 4chan, even though those are the prime examples. So thank you, both of you. It's increasingly on websites, even on popular news sites, where people are allowed to comment on their own on what they believe to be the best response for these ideas. In this sense, even if they do it on their own websites to close quote government whip, that doesn't then detract from the argument that we are talking about. That the online world continues to be misogynistic, the online world continues to be patriarchal and continues to be conservative. But why exactly is this bad? We presented two hands, no direct engagement from closing government yet again. First, that their abuse is belittled. Here's the thing, we presume, no thank you, that people will say, okay, this is an abuse and we will avoid it. But that's not necessarily what always happens. We always see people saying in situations like this, we believe that women will feel a lot of is the best course of action, therefore, to go online and achieve this. Thank you. It's all their charge. And when women actively try to do this, believe that their abuse gets little. We think the harm is optional. But second, and perhaps a bigger issue, is the reverse doxing that happens. Very interestingly, you see to dox their abusers. What actually happens is that very often we hear stories of women receiving new pics in response, but thank you for a variety of men online after they dox their abusers. And what's worse is that the original dox gets removed and the women in turn get doxed on these websites. We argue that if women are only going to suffer even more abuse by adopting this process of doxing, we don't stand for it. We don't think the kind of support communities will be created. We don't think the towns will be created. In fact, it will probably be worse off. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this your doxing argument is a bit strange because you dox when you've already been abused. What more abuse are you looking forward to at all?
Huh? No. That's not how it works. When you get abused by a single person, you dox that person in response. Presumably that's your mechanism. You post this online so other people can know about it. The problem we are highlighting is that when you post it online, everyone targets you, everyone doxes you, and therefore sends you new pics, abuses you. So thank you. We don't think that's a good thing. That's the argument we proved, and no response coming from closing government. So we think we take that quite fair. What they prove at the end of this, the online world is pernicious, and women doxing online the marginal benefit they present is a bit vulnerable. And here's where we engage with the idea of comfort, which wasn't really quite well explained. Two groups of women under this videos in the real world in order to garner change for online jurisdiction. But the problem is not about what the dynamic is. It's not about the women was abused immensely. It's about the perception of this dynamic and how is it likely to be perceived. When you see an abuse threat, when you see a woman who perhaps feels afraid of this man, like you after an online conversation, it's very easy to dismiss. That's why no one stands up perhaps against slut shaming online, as they rightfully pointed out, because it's so easy to just say you should have ignored it. But the problem is that when you can see the clear perhaps of revealing a home address, revealing an email address of the perpetrator, it's very easy to perceive the dynamic as stacked against the perpetrator rather than against the victim. This is not so in real life, perhaps, the dynamic, but is perceived to be so. And in this way, it's very easy to turn moderates against women or against women who dox online because it is then perceived that they are using a disproportionate measure against their abusers. At the end of the day, we think this turns away from the legal protection that we want to achieve. We think it's terrible in the real world when we want to garner some sort of change in order to achieve the protection that both sides want. Thank you. So, how do we do this? We do this by making sure women don't dox online. We do this by showing the kind of abuse that happened, perhaps not by explicitly stating the home address of the perpetrator and then garnering and then enacting that sort of change. That's how we protect vulnerable women in society. But second and more specifically, we talk about women who are not comfortable with doxing. And here's the closing government misrepresented our argument. We're not saying that everyone needs to create a kind of social expectation, the sort of victim blaming after. We talk about women who suffer perhaps from learned helplessness. And these perhaps who are most vulnerable in society, most vulnerable because they have a connection with their online abuser. So yes, really, women who are able to dox and are able to come up perhaps might incur some sort of benefit, but at the expense of women who are most vulnerable. Where are we likely to see this manifest? We're likely to see women therefore online saying, why didn't you dox your abuser if you think that's such a big problem? Then perhaps you should have reported the police because you weren't willing to go online and find that abuser anyway. What you therefore create is a kind of social expectation that everyone must be able to dox. Everyone must be able to reveal themselves online or to put their perpetrator online in order to be recognized as a legitimate victim. We think that is terrible, but only by doxing can your victimhood be recognized. We think that ultimately not only retrogrades from the wider feminist movement, wider recognition of online abuse, but also hurts these women who are most vulnerable. At the end of the day, closing our position proves why the online world is pernicious and why we protect the most vulnerable best stand firmly on closing up.